Welcome back. The White House is defending President Trump's decision to implement 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada and another 10% tariff on China this upcoming Tuesday. One official telling Fox Business it's because of the dire fentanyl situation at both the northern and the southern border. More than 1,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized across the country last month, enough to kill more than 230 million people. It's a majority of Americans. Police seized over 2 pounds in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, about 13,000 lethal doses in Phoenix, 161 pounds of fentanyl pills, and 47 pounds of powder found just last month. Border crossings are still happening despite the numbers plummeting. This month at the New York border, first responders rescued a woman from the Dominican Republic, a man from Spain, and an Algerian national, all who needed medical attention while trying to cross into America. Now they face deportation. Joining me now is Tennessee Congressman. He is chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mark Green. Mr. Chairman, it's great to have you back. Thanks so much for being here.
Great. Yeah, great to be with you, Maria. Thanks for having me.
Tom Homan told me recently that border crossings are down 93%. Have you seen a change in terms of the safety and security of the homeland? We've been talking in the past about the effects of some of these criminals that were unvetted. Have you seen any changes?
Yeah, absolutely. We're far more secure than we were just months ago. And think about it this way. You know, national security is a combination. It's deterrence, which is a combination, or actually it's the product, not the sum, of willpower and capability. You can have all the capability in the world. If it's multiplied times zero willpower, you get zero deterrence. Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, all of those things, the border wide open. We basically had cartels committing, violent acts in the United States. All of those things under the last administration, those things are stabilizing now. We're definitely more secure. And as far as the fentanyl goes, the enemy, so to speak, the cartels and the Chinese suppliers are just going to try to find other ways. And that's why, besides just shutting down crossing sites and things like that, we have to plus up the Border Patrol. We got to build more border wall. Those things take a little bit more time. And we're working with the president, the administration, to get that done in reconciliation.
So this Tuesday, I want to get back to reconciliation in a second, but this Tuesday, President Trump has confirmed the 25% tariff is going into effect on Canada and Mexico, 10% on Canada energy, and then there's going to be an additional 10% tariff on all China goods. So that becomes 20% because there's already 10% on that. Are you seeing enough from Mexico and Canada with regard to helping us with this, and China, by the way, with this fentanyl situation?
The issue with Mexico specifically is their government is doing sort of a schizophrenic, dual personality thing. On the one hand, they're putting their military on the Guatemalan border, so they're helping with the flow of migrants, things like that. But they are still beholden to the cartels in their country. You might recall that the president of Mexico said, no U.S. troops will come here. We're a sovereign nation. Look, if she really cared about the drug cartels, she'd be inviting us down there to take care of this. They're killing Americans. And she's got to be a better partner in taking on these cartels and the fentanyl. And so I'd say it's sort of a split personality thing with regards to Mexico.
Well, I know she's the president of Mexico, but are the drug cartels really running Mexico?
Well, I think you can make a lot of arguments for and against that, but I mean, very clearly they get their way. So, I'd say so.
You've done such a great job on China, communicating the threat. I want to get into China for a moment here, Mr. Chairman, because Chinese-linked cyber attacks have surged by 150% last year. That's according to CrowdStrike's annual global threat report. Hits on sectors like financial services, media, manufacturing, industrials increased from 200% to 300% in that time frame. Mr. Chairman, the House Homeland Security Committee passed the Cyber Pivot Act out of committee this week. Tell me about this threat of cyber. Who's getting impacted, and how important is this pushback on communist China?
Well, it's absolutely critical. And again, it comes back to willpower. We have the capability, to stand up and go on the offensive in cyber, and we need to do it. It's time that we act and show the Chinese that we're not going to tolerate the fact that they're in our infrastructure. They're in our water systems, our power systems. They invaded our telecoms. They're in AT&T and Verizon's systems right now. I mean, and they could turn them off if they wanted to, we believe. So imagine if Russia or China put a satchel charge against a cell tower. Americans would be livid, blew up a cell tower. But China basically has the ability right now to do those kinds of acts of espionage and acts of war by invading our telecoms and our infrastructure. It's unacceptable, and it's time we push back. And I agree with my former colleague, Mike Walls, who's now in the administration. It's time to go on the offensive. But we've also, this issue with the Pivot Act, the number one challenge we have is the number of people that we've been training to be cyber experts. Director Wray, when he was leading the FBI, came in and testified and said if he put every cyber person he had on the China desk, he'd still be outnumbered 50-1. We have 500,000 empty jobs in this country, and so we created a scholarship program that will put kids into cyber fields, pay their way. They pay the government. They pay the taxpayer back by serving the government at all levels of government, and this is how we start the step. I mean, readiness is about right people in the right jobs. That's the number one thing, of the 5 things that are critical with readiness.
So I want to get your take on how policy can help here, because the president issued a memorandum. It was the America First investment policy last week, and it limits China's access to U.S. capital markets as part of the America First investment policy. It orders the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States to block Chinese investments in sensitive sectors like technology, energy, and defense. And God knows they do that to the United States. It also looks into auditing standards, Mr. Chairman. They're exploiting capital to develop and modernize their military, intelligence, and other security apparatuses. The Chinese companies raise capital by selling to American investors securities that trade on American and foreign public exchanges. This is not an executive order. This is a memorandum from President Trump, America First investment policy. How will this be used in terms of actual changes to our relationship with China?
Well, honestly, Congress has to act too. CFIUS is porous, and we've got legislation that I've brought forward that will require a license. It's another step to sell technology to China. We've got to put more eyes on our business sector. And honestly, we need American businesses to put America first too. This partnership with China to get low-cost labor has put our nation in a national security threat situation, and we need the business community to listen to President Trump, listen to those of us who recognize China as a threat, and start acting that way.
Yeah, this is a very important point. Stop going into China to sell goods to 1.4 billion people because you want to make money on it. Start understanding the national security impact here. Corporate America. I want to get your take on the reconciliation, sir, because you just mentioned it, and considering now, Congress is considering how to pay for the Trump agenda, including in the House's budget resolution. Some lawmakers concerned that the committee in charge of finding the $880 billion in savings will have to dip into Medicaid. Where are you on this? And do you believe that it's a fair point to make that the House's version of the budget plan that was passed this week does not allow for the tax cuts to be permanent? The Senate is going to say, wait, we can't take up your bill because our 2 bills will allow this to be permanent.
Well, the tax cuts should be permanent. There's no doubt about that. And in this budget, there were people on both extremes of our party that were unhappy with it. But clearly, from my perspective, it should have done more cutting. If you look at the 2019 budget and this budget we're having for 2025, it's $2.6 trillion more from 2019 to 2025. There's absolutely $2 trillion we can cut out of the budget, and we should. Now, I want to correct the false, narrative from the left. There are no cuts to Medicare. In fact, Medicare is not even mentioned. And in terms of Medicaid, we're just going after the waste, fraud, and abuse. No one's benefits are going to change. And we think that people ought to work if they're capable of working to get the benefit from the government. Look, the taxpayer has to write this check. Your neighbor who's sitting across from you is paying for your health care and Medicaid. If you're able-bodied, you ought to be able to work for that. Go out and do something to help cover it. I think the budget that we put together in the House is a good compromise between our extremes in the House.
Yeah.
Now, as far as permanency, it should happen, but it's a negotiation.
Yeah, but if 76% of the spending is going to mandatory programs and just 24% to discretionary, don't you actually have to cut into mandatory?
Eventually, we have to, absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
Mr. Chairman, great to talk with you. Please come back soon. We so appreciate your time, sir.